Hello everyone, Hamad here. Welcome to my channel, Cloud with Hamad, DIY cloud learning to inspire. For today, our web series is to deploy and configure Azure Firewall using Azure Portal. But before we start diving into Azure and deploy Firewall, if you are new to my channel, please subscribe as I upload cloud-related videos weekly. And if you are returning to my channel because you really like my videos, then please hit that like button. I would really appreciate it. Now, without further delay, let's go to our notes. Okay, so today to deploy and configure firewall using Azure Portal, this is a diagram for what are we going to do. Let me zoom it in a little bit just to show you. They both are the same diagram, so anyone logging in from internet will hit the public IP for firewall, and then firewall would authenticate to a server or whatever web services you have for the system, for the network. And then if you look at this window, this picture, this is pretty much the same, where people are logging in through internet, hitting the firewall, and they can go to different VNet. If we pair them, you can connect and talk to different firewall, but over here we're not doing that. Okay, so before we do that, let's quickly recap what we're going to do. We will deploy a resource. We will set up a test network environment with 10.16 VNet. We will create two subnets. One subnet would be Azure Firewall subnet with 10.26, and then we'll create a backend subnet where we would deploy a web server of 10.2.24. We'll deploy a Windows virtual machine. Windows 2016 would be good enough. And then we will deploy a firewall. Then once we have a firewall deployed, we will, while firewall is being deployed, we will create a default route. And then once we get a default route ready, we will go back to firewall and start setting up application rule, network rule, and NAT rule. And then once all of those are set up, we will actually we'll test out our connection. I think we should be good to go. This is the easiest solution I think I have seen. And there are times where I know that people are a little scared about firewall, about the rules, and it seems like a little challenging every time I talk to somebody, but honestly, this is the easiest way to deploy. If you look at my video and you really like it, don't forget to hit that like button, because I think this is the easiest solution that I can provide. So let's go start deploying firewall. All right, so over here I'm already logged into my Azure account. I am in my I would think I'm in my MSDN platform subscription. So we'll just take this one here, and we will, it's a pretty new subscription. Anyways, so we'll come here, we'll start creating resource. Our first step is to create resource. We'll go up here and hit resource group. First we will create resource, and then we will start deploying stuff in there. So we already have subscription here. Resource, we will give name, I would say HS dash firewall RG, and we will be deploying it in West. I can deploy in any of those. It's just that I am close to West Coast, so I will keep it West. And here I gave the name of the resource group, Cloud HS. That is Hamad Siddiqui. And then we'll go next, and then we'll hit create. So we have a resource created, and we will go into, once we have created the resource, I am going back to the main page. I will deploy a network, and for this network, what we'll do is let's first deploy a, well, I'm sure it will create a one default network, but let's create a firewall net. So once again, select subscription. I would select my resource group that I just created. I will give it a name of Cloud HS Firewall, and I would say VNet, and again we'll just use VESUS. Next, and then I think we already have a 10.24. I think I'm gonna just leave this and add another. Actually, let's change this. Maybe we already have a 10.16, so we'll just add another one. We'll give this one subnet for Azure Firewall. So just like Bastion host, you need to give a name for Azure Firewall subnet. I mean, let me say it's Azure. So I would just create a subnet. I would type in Azure Firewall subnet, and then let's give them an IP of 10.0.0, actually 10.1.0. I think that will work out better, and then we'll do a 626 sub. So it will give us about 59 IPs, no endpoints. I would just hit add, and then this is for firewall subnets. I created a separate subnet. What we're going to do is we will create another subnet, and that subnet that we'll use is for deploying servers or machine or whatever it is. You can give whatever name you need. I'll just do backend SNet. I would just do 10.0. Let's say 2.0, and then I'll give them a 24, and this gives me a 251 as well. And then hit add. So we got right so far we have created a resource group, and then we created a VNet virtual network, and then we have given two subnets, which is an Azure Firewall subnet, which is 10.1.26, and then backend subnet 10.2.24. So what we'll do is we'll actually create a virtual machine. The next step would be, and then what we'll do is we will deploy the virtual machine in this subnet. So let's go and start creating a subnet. Well, I think I haven't done the subnet yet, so let me click on this. Next. Actually, version host, that's good. Next, and we'll hit create. So while it does that, let's go to our virtual machine, and then we will deploy a virtual machine, and this will be in the backend subnet. We'll get here, we'll add a virtual machine. Again, we will put that virtual machine in our firewall resource group. Virtual name, I would say Cloud HS VM Firewall VM01. I'm just coming it out of availability set. We don't need that right now. We'll use the data center 2016. Size, I'll just keep it to B2. I really don't need a bigger machine, so we'll just do that. Again, user ID, test admin, password, and then public inbound, I'll just put in none, because what we need is we need to use this to get into, we'll just deploy this, and we'll use firewall to decide whether where it needs to go. So that's why I've said none. Don't forget to hit that license. I'll confirm and hit next. Because it's a test lab, we'll just select standard. so that it doesn't cost too much, even though I have money in my subscription. Network, it picked up the network. If you look up here, I had created two subnets. One was already default already there, and then it just picked up a backend subnet where it's going to deploy. So 10.0.2.0 is the backend subnet. It will be behind the firewall. IP address, you can create a new IP. You can just use this. Security group if you want to, but I would just leave it the way it is. None is fine, I think. You can put in the security group if you like, and I would just go ahead. Actually, let's go back here for a second. I want to check one more thing here. Next, standard. Actually, we won't be giving a public IP because that's what I was thinking. Because we don't. This is going to be controlled via firewall. So having it given a public IP or an IP would not make any sense. So it's just going to be working with internal IP. I will hit next. That's what I was thinking. Next. Boot diagnostic. We don't need it. Rest of them, we really don't need to back up. Guest update. Next, and then review and create. If you still do not understand what I did was, it was asking me to create a public IP, which first I thought I went through because I create machines so many times, but later on I realized that, hey, you know what, the IP will be given or will be controlled by the firewall. So I'm just going to hit none and go ahead and start deploying the machine. And then once we have that, we will actually use that private IP on that machine to connect. I use firewall to give some address. You'll see what I mean. So I'm going to hit create, and then I will move further to start deploying firewall. Okay, so we already have this created. Let's go and deploy a firewall. For firewall, we will give create. And then we'll give a name. I would say Cloud HS Firewall. And then we'll deploy it in West US. Virtual network, I will use existing virtual network, one that I just created earlier. IP address, we don't have an IP address, we have to create a new IP address. I would say firewall PIP, and I will hit OK. And then if you know that it did not ask me for subnet, because it already has a subnet that we created, that is Azure Firewall subnet. So it's going to deploy in that one. Just to FYI, if there was anything else, it would have asked me, hey, you know what, where's the subnet? So go ahead and hit tag, if you want to hit tag, review, and then hit create. So firewall usually takes 5 to 10 minutes. I'm going to put a pause and then come back as soon as the firewall is deployed. And as you can see, the deployment is progress. It's going to take at least 5 minutes, so I'm going to wait and I will be right back. Okay, while the firewall is deploying, I'm going to create that route table. So I will get here, I will hit add, and you can just type in route table here and it would show up if you want to. If you're wondering how it came in, it was showing up on my dashboard, so I just selected from there. Use the resource group, and then West US. I would just giving a name of route table. I say firewall route, and propagate gateway route. I'd be okay with that. Next, and I will create the route. So once that is created, what we'll do is we'll go in there and we will associate the subnet with firewall route. And all right, so it's done. Go ahead and hit resources. I would go here. So one more thing that we can do here. Okay, so once we get here, we will go to, okay, so firewall is also deployed. We will go to subnet here, and then we will associate this route with, let's click on firewall VNet. I would just use the backend subnet, and I would hit click OK. Once that takes place, what we'll do is we'll select the route and then add another one so that we can have a firewall route set up. Okay, so that is created. We'll hit route and we'll add a route. Over here we'll just give them a firewall RT address space. It can be address space will be 0.0.0.0/0. Any traffic that hits firewall will just use virtual appliance. So virtual appliance would be Azure. Like Azure Firewall is actually a managed service, but virtual appliance works in this situation. So we'll just use virtual appliance. And over here, we will give actually the private address of the firewall. Since we already have a firewall deployed, we'll go in here. We'll use the private hop for firewall. This is my IP. Click OK. So let me explain this again. For any traffic that is on this subnet, there is a route created for firewall that is any 000, any IP that you sitting outside the network with any IP address will hit that route. It will get to the firewall. So now what we'll do is we'll go into our firewall rule. Get here. So as you can see, there are 3 rules: NAT rules, network rules, application rule. First, what we'll do is we'll configure our application rule. So we'll hit application, hit application collection, and then I would just give them whatever name you like. I would say, I would just give, I'm very bad in giving names, so I would say application firewall rule. I would give it a priority of 200, allow, and I would first do app, I would say 01. IP address would be, so this IP address will be the one for the subnet. So remember, the virtual machine is deployed in 10.0.2.0. So we'll just give it 10.0.2.0/24. And then, actually, my bad, it has to be in target. Let's exit out here. and then over here I would do http://https. I would just type in www.google.com, and we'll do, you can do CNN, and we'll do Google. Same thing, any traffic that is hitting in this subnet, it can be either HTTP or HTTPS. .com will be allowed. Rest of them will be denied. So I said anything that is in that subnet of 10.0.2.0.24, it is trying to use google.com or cnn.com, it's allowed. So I will also show you if I type in facebook.com or cnbc.com, it will deny just because of this rule. So first we'll just set up a application rule, and then we'll go to network rule, and then once we get to network rule, we'll just same thing, add a network rule. You can give name, I would say NAT rule, priority same 200, allow, and for NAT rule I would say IP address, I would say allow DNS. So what we'll do is I'll allow anything that is DNS, that is, so what we'll do is for this I'm going to allow, like, give the virtual machine that I deployed in subnet 2.0, I will give them a DNS address, okay? And then once DNS address means that, whatever, like google.com, or not google.com, but we'll give them a name. And then we will, what happens is we will give same thing, 10.0.2.0/24, and then over here I'm going to give IP for DNS server that is basically operated by CenturyLink, and it is for Azure. So I'll explain in a second here. Let me put this 3 for port, I would say 53. And I'll just do the same thing for protocol. I'll just do UDP, I think, yeah, UDP, and then same thing, same subnet, 10.0.2.0/24, IP address, anything, and then this is also 209.244.0.4, and the port destination would be 53. Just like Route 53. Click OK, add. So we have so far set up application rule where we have allowed CNN and google.com, and then once we got to network, we allowed any DNS machine that hits the network will be able to connect, and we will be able to allow google.com, cnn.com. NAT rule, so in the NAT rule is basically remote desktoping to the machine that we set up. So click add, same thing, I would just give them RDP, priority would be the same, 200. Over here I would just say, I would say NAT RDP. Protocol, I would just select TCP, and then source IP, it's fine. And then for anything, I would just put an asterisk. So any traffic that comes in and hit the firewall public IP. So over here, I would give firewall public IP. So I'll come here. Click here. For public IP, I need to click the firewall PIP, and then I would just copy the IP address from here. Once again, once you get to the firewall, there's this public IP. It comes up with this name. You just have to click on top of it, and it would show you the IP address of the firewall. Come up here in the destination address for NAT rule, NAT rule, you'll put the IP address of the firewall. I would destination port would be 3389. That is the port for machine that will provide the name. And then over here we will give the name for the virtual machine that we have. Earlier, remember I mentioned that, you know, I'm not giving a public IP for that machine, so this is where we would just come up here and we'll just take this private IP. If you notice, there is no public IP up here, so there's nothing, you know. So that's the goal. Come up here, we'll hit public IP, and then the port would be 3389, and we will just hit add. So let me explain this once again. For NAT rule, if you're outside, outbounder, and you want to connect to a machine that is inside the network and it is behind the firewall, you will set up a rule RDP. Any source will hit this IP address of the firewall, which is 104.40.92.174, will have a destination port of 3389. It can be HTTP if it's a web server or IIS server, but now we're saying is that, hey, you know what? This actually is the private IP for that virtual machine and the port. Hit add. So that's it. We are pretty much done. Now what we're going to do is one more thing. What we'll do is we'll just go to change the name of the DNS address. So we'll go to our network interface. Let me just refresh here. One more thing. So this is done. This is done. This is done. All right, come back up here. I would go to my VNet. Open my VNet. And I will hit DNS server on the left. And then hit custom IP address. I would actually do an IP address of the one that 209.244.0.3, and then we'll say, hey, 209.244.0.4. Basically what we're doing is we're adding DNS name to that network, because any machine that is on DNS with that is the DNS, as I mentioned, that, you know, these are the public, like these IP 209.244.0.3.4 is a public DNS server operated by CenturyLink, and this you can just do port 53 on that, and then we'll just add those. Click save. And I think we are ready to test out. I'm going to open my Mobox and then we'll test the connection. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and hit, I think it was Extreme. I use this third-party software. I really like it. Click session. I would do a RDP. And let me get an IP for the firewall. Actually up here, that's a VNet. Firewall, PIP, and then we'll just copy the public IP. This because what's happening is I am sitting outside the network. I need to log into a machine that is inside the network. I am using firewall, and what I don't have the public IP for that machine, so I will hit that firewall from my machine to log into an internal machine that was created earlier. So let's try that again. Click here, test admin, and I would hit enter. I should close this, click OK. All right, so it seems like we are connecting. No. Okay, seems like it's all good. So we are logged in now. That's perfect. I would go here to the dashboard, local server. I will disable the enhanced security so that we don't get pop-up, and we'll test out some rules here. We're going to minimize this, open up Internet Explorer. Okay, so let me explain this. What's happening is let's test out one thing here before I explain this. So I think if you remember, firewall let's go to firewall for a second here. In rules, we set in application rule, which was anything that is google.com, cnn.com with port 80 or 443 coming from this subnet. What subnet is this? This is the subnet that I deployed on the virtual machine on. So this was a virtual machine on this subnet named backend with a private IP, no public IP. So I just gave them this name. I would close this, and I would go back to my machine just to test it out. So I would just say google.com. And google.com is not working. So that's perfect for the start. I'll go back here. Rules. Seems like just working fine. Okay, let's check it out. We are connected, so I'm gonna try to see what's going on here. Alright guys, so I believe one thing that we missed after doing the firewall rules, like the application rule and network rule and NAT rule, I need to reboot the machine. So not my machine, the virtual machine. So what I did was I have rebooted the machine. So let's go back and log in. Seems like all set up correctly. Just gonna see if the machine is come back up. Yeah, it's running, and our firewall public IP is 104.174. We will 104. 92.174. Is that what the IP was? 92.174. Yeah. Okay, so we'll just try to connect after the restart and see if it works. Okay, yeah, so it came back up. Now we're going to try the google.com. So every time you do a reboot, see, it stopped working again. Huh. Even though I have restarted it. Oh, okay. So it started working again. So that's interesting. Maybe the root took time. Google. Interesting. CNN is working. Okay, the Google is working. I'm not sure what's going on. Let's check it out with Microsoft. Okay, yeah, Microsoft won't work because we haven't allowed Microsoft. So just to show you what I'm doing is, as you saw, that I cannot connect to Microsoft because, you know, I haven't allowed it. So I'm going to hit rules and actually not here. Application rule. And I would add another line here, allow ms.com, and I would say same subnet 0.2.0/24 http comma https microsoft.com, and I would hit save. And it's going to update. As soon as it's update, I will. I don't think I need to reboot again, but you know, you never know, so we might have to reboot. I'm going to put a pause and come back once this rules is updated, and we will actually let me show you what's going on. So let me recap before we end the tutorial. We created a resource group named Cloud HS Firewall, and then in that resource group we created a virtual network, and then in virtual network we created two subnets. One is Azure Firewall subnet specifically for Azure Firewall, and with 10.10, and it had 58 available IP addresses, and then we created another backend subnet for any virtual machines or anything application that was going to be run on that same network. And after that, we deployed a virtual machine on this subnet. So if I come here, you should see that in this resource group, I had deployed this virtual machine. And this virtual machine, once I deployed it, no public IP address, just private IP address, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect. I did connect from public IP address of the firewall to this machine, and then once I got there, we created another firewall. We created a firewall and then in that firewall we actually assigned rules. First we assigned application rules where we said, hey, you know what, we can only have CNN, Google, and Microsoft working. And then also we did NAT rule. NAT rule is basically anything inside the network. So we said that, hey, you know what, allow DNS, like that means that anything with DNS coming from, so every machine has a DNS address. So 10.2.0, 10.0.2.0, that is the subnet for our virtual machine IP, can connect to the destination address, which is the DNS. What this is basically a domain address for Azure DNS. So this is, I said a couple of times, this is a public DNS server, and it is operated by CenturyLink, and its full port is port 53. So anything that would hit this would go to port 53, and port 53 will allow the traffic. So once we get there, then we created a net rule. Net rule is to connect from outside traffic to hit the firewall. So what we did was RDPing in, which we connected through this box, and then we hit any source. That is what my source is. What is my IP? I can put in my IP and connect, and then hit the firewall IP, which is a public IP, and that public IP would go to a destination port, which is 3389, and then the translated address would be the IP, the private IP for that network. So I think you guys already know. After that, I think I did one more step where I went to my network. Sorry, not this one. I went to my network, and then this is the only network I have. In that network, I would go to setting and go to DNS server. So I'm actually in my network. I'm trying to define what are the DNS address that is I put as source in the I think I showed you over there. It was actually in the network rules. I put in the destination address for those these two into that network rule, and once that is done, I would just restart my machine so that all the rules applies. I'm gonna just see if I can test Microsoft again, and I think Microsoft won't work because I have to restart. CNN will work. Okay. Google will work. Google should work. I think it's kind of spotty right now, especially with firewall rule setup. Yeah, so it's working. Let me try one more time, see if I need to restart. And Microsoft works. So that is the rule for, that is the explicit rule where if these three access, it will work. So anyways, this is the whole like the summary of what we did. We tested out. So if you have any question, please feel free to reach out. If you like the video, subscribe obviously, and then also like it. Give me a thumbs up. And if you have any wish list, or you want me to do another demo of either Azure or AWS, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to make videos, and thank you. Have a great day.